Returning home as a demobilized soldier in the Soviet Army was not just a matter of course. It had to be done in style, with panache, so that from the threshold of your native home it was clear. Before you stood not just a man, but a soldier who had served and seen life, who deserved respect. Therefore, on the eve of demobilization, Soviet soldiers worked night after night on their dress uniforms, transforming them into true masterpieces of tailoring. In the mess halls, in the recreation rooms, on empty bunks in the barracks, needles rustled quietly, fabric rustled, and the heavy smell of glue, thread, and fresh paint for belts hung over the tables. In everyday military service, such a uniform would, of course, be absolutely unacceptable. The first meeting with the commander of the unit would have ended sadly for its owner. The commander would have ordered without further ado to destroy all this indescribable beauty, to rip it off, remove it, paint over it, and bring everything into line with regulations. But for the demob, everything was different. It was a ritual that had been tried and tested for decades. The main difficulty lay not only in creating this uniform, but also in getting it out of the unit without any officer seeing it. It was quite an operation. Sometimes the uniform was taken out in parts, hiding epaulets, stripes, and accessories in bags with dirty laundry, sometimes through acquaintances who, for a couple of cans of stew, could turn a blind eye to the violation. Twice a year, the senior officers had a hunting season for demobbed soldiers. This was about a month before the next draft and discharge into the reserves, when a special feeling of freedom began to spread through the barracks. Formally, a month before demobilization, it was allowed not to get a haircut, and the hair did indeed have time to grow. But that was according to the documents. In reality, quiffs, bangs, and chemicals appeared on their heads much earlier, and by the time they were sent home, some soldiers already had entire architectural structures of hair emerging above their caps. The military commandant's office patrols did not always turn a blind eye to this beauty. Posters hung on the walls of the commandant's office with clear examples of what a Soviet soldier should not wear: bright epaulets, shiny belts, trousers ironed to a mirror shine, homemade badges painted like New Year's toys. If such a patrol encountered a self-propelled, demobilized soldier, they could strip him on the spot, tearing off all his demobilization paraphernalia, and at the slightest attempt to protest, send him to the guardhouse. It was especially upsetting for those who were discharged in winter. If something happened to a demobilized soldier in uniform and he fell into the hands of the commandant's office in December, they could hold him until the 31st and release him only in the evening, which meant that he would not be celebrating the New Year at home, but on the road, on a train, in the company of other lucky ones. Incidentally, the first Soviet epaulets for privates and sergeants had red edging around the edges. This detail was considered a symbol that gave the uniform a special elegance, but in 1955 it was abolished and replaced with a more austere, laconic version. But the abolition of the statutory red edging on the epaulets did not mean that it disappeared from army life. Demob, as befits masters of improvisation, continued to make it themselves, often even brighter and richer than the official version. The same thing happened with the metal letters, Soviet Army, which were affixed to the epaulets of conscripts' dress uniforms from 1973 to 1980. When they stopped being produced, resourceful demobbed soldiers began to make them themselves, from non-ferrous metals, brass plates, pieces of copper, and sometimes even from scraps of aluminum parts found in warehouses or discarded in workshops. The stripes on the epaulets were also often replaced with shiny metal ones so that they would sparkle in the sunlight or lamplight and be visible from a distance. And almost all of the epaulets had stiff inserts, so-called glass pieces or planks, so that the epaulets did not sag, but stood proudly, slightly curved, giving the military figure an even more impressive appearance. Anything that came to hand was used for these inserts: plexiglass, plastic, pieces cut from old instrument lenses, scraps from ammunition boxes. Sometimes even plastic folder covers or flat pieces from broken helmets were used. The secret was that the inserts were placed in the epaulets so that they could be removed instantly if necessary, in case of a sudden encounter with an officer or an inspection. In the countryside, such glass pieces were placed everywhere, especially in the second year of service, when it was already possible to allow oneself a little more freedom. There was also a special rule regarding the wearing of winter hats with ear flaps. For grandfathers, senior officers, the hat had to sit high on the head, slightly raised and tilted back, which gave the image a certain air of casual confidence. For salags, new recruits, it was worn strictly according to regulations, about 2 fingers above the eyebrows, tightly and without a hint of style. But with the long-awaited demobilization approaching, the cap underwent special treatment. It was beaten, ironed, stretched, tinted with shoe polish, most often black or brown, and special inserts were placed inside to give it shape. There were many methods. One of the most popular was to wet the cap and carefully stretch it over a stack of books, usually volumes of Marx and Engels, as these were abundant in every unit and were the perfect size. The hat was left in the cap for several days until it was completely dry. Another method was to iron it with a hot iron through a waffle towel so that the fur and fabric took the desired shape and no longer sprung back. As a result of all these clever manipulations, the grandfather's Ashanka hat was transformed into a true work of demobilization art. It became square cubic in shape, small in size but surprisingly tall, with a crown that could rival the height of a general's papaka. The coolest demob soldiers even gave it the silhouette of the boyar headdresses of Ivan the Terrible's time, so that when you looked at it, you might think that you were looking not at a conscript soldier, but at some kind of miniature voivode. To give the cap extra chic, they also polished it with new iridescence. The fur was treated so that it shone in the light, shimmered, and seemed to become as expensive as sable. Some particularly enterprising demobs went even further. They bought themselves officers' caps for their discharge, obtaining them from senior officers or in army intorgs, stores for military personnel, and did the same thing with them. They beat them, stretched them, dyed them, inserted stiff strips, and bent the cockade. The cockade, by the way, sometimes bent so much that it almost folded in half, and the metal ears of grain on the sides converged close to the red star, giving the cap the appearance of a real trophy masterpiece. However, such freedom was dangerous. If the commander or senior grandfather saw that the cockade was bent not according to the regulations, then the salaga could correct the cap right on the head with a fist, so that it rang in the ears. A particularly chic item in demobilization culture was a fuzzy overcoat worn to the point of becoming mohair. To achieve this, the overcoat fabric was combed for hours with a metal brush until it became soft, fluffy, and slightly shiny. The same cloth was used to cover the cover of the demobilization album, so that it would look as respectable as its owner. The dress jacket was tailored to fit the figure. It was shortened to fit perfectly, and the trousers were narrowed to the point of being fishing rods, so narrow that they could only be put on with effort. The creases on the trousers were coated with glue so that they would stay in place, and even after several hours of marching, they looked as if they had just been ironed. A thin white edging was stretched along the edges of the uniform, from the collar to the lapels and sides, which was made of unbraided aluminum wire, shiny, like fresh wire from an electrical laboratory. The buttons, of course, were officers' buttons, larger and brighter, so that it was clear from a distance that a demobilized soldier was approaching. All this splendor was completed by a white parade belt with a massive shiny badge. It was polished to such a mirror-like finish that it literally blinded the eyes, reflecting the sun's glare. Often, in pursuit of absolute perfection, demob soldiers would take up the belt. Under normal army conditions, the end of the belt that was free behind the buckle was simply cut off or folded over, but demob soldiers never did things like everyone else. Here, imagination and artistic taste came into play. The tip of the belt could be cut into a fancy shape, for example, in the form of a silhouette of a naked female figure, in profile or full face, and some managed to carve miniature scenes or emblems. Such an element became the demobilized soldier's personal signature, and it was immediately clear that you were not looking at an ordinary soldier, but a master of subtle army aesthetics. Demobilized soldiers' shoes were considered a separate chic. Standard canvas boots underwent radical modernization. The tops were shortened to the point of impossibility, so that the boots looked more like stylish boots or fashionable shoes, and the heels were made slightly higher than regulation, for a more majestic stride. The heels were reinforced with titanium horseshoes or hard pobedita inserts so that each step sounded like a hollow metallic click. When the owner of such boots walked down the street and shuffled his feet slightly, a dazzling shower of sparks and sand flew from under the heel, and passers-by involuntarily turned around. In some regions, the distinctive feature of boots was not the famous accordion upper, but the so-called bold arrow, a perfectly ironed longitudinal bend running down the center of the boot. After such ironing, the boots could be thrown away. The canvas flattened and lost its original shape, but the uppers acquired a smooth, dense surface on which matte streaks lay beautifully, creating the effect of expensive leather. Kurza boots were polished with red-hot wire to remove the nap and achieve a perfectly smooth surface, and particularly inventive demobbed soldiers went so far as to varnish them with shoe polish, turning the boots into almost dress shoes. All kinds of hard inserts could be inserted inside, from plastic to thin metal, which, according to the regulations, were not and could not be found in soldiers' boots. According to an unspoken canon, all demobbed soldiers' chests had to sparkle with orders, medals, and badges so that it was impossible to look at the sun without dark glasses. There was complete, unbridled creativity here. In addition to the awards prescribed by the service, you could find anything on the tunic. Among this wealth, the only thing missing at times was the gold star of the hero of the Soviet Union, and I am sure that some would have tried to get it if they had the opportunity. A badge for 105 parachute jumps could sit next to a badge for a year and a half in submarine service, which was frankly fantastic for a particular soldier. Right next to them were Soviet, Polish, Hungarian, and even captured German military badges, obtained God knows how. It was like a Real museum under glass, only without a display case. The demobilized soldier marched proudly, and with every movement, his chest jingled melodiously and sparkled, attracting attention like a lighthouse in the night. As a result, many demobbed soldiers went home dressed up like self-propelled New Year's trees, and not modest forest beauties, but the ones they put up in the main square of the city, with tinsel, garlands, and garlands of awards. In the dreams of demobbed soldiers, as soon as they appear on the platform of their home station, girls of all types and ages, blinded by their brilliance, rush to them in crowds, like females to the bright plumage of a male bird of paradise. This dream, it must be said, is still alive today. And if you suddenly meet a person at the station, airport, or even on the bus wearing something vaguely resembling a military uniform, but with everything on it shining, shimmering, and jingling, don't be alarmed. It's not electroplating, a modern art installation, or a forgotten exhibit from a military museum. This is a demobilized soldier returning home in all his gamer glory, which is essentially his ceremonial, combat finery. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell us in the comments where you served and how you were discharged.